Hello, Thrive Nation. We have got the most special guest on the show today. I've been following him for a while, and it's a privilege to have him on. He is a world-class behavioral scientist. He's a humanitarian extraordinaire, but most importantly, and this is the most important thing that I found out about him when I read his incredible book. He's a Springbok supporter, he's a Springbok fan, and he's even written about the Springboks, which was the first words that I read out of this incredible book. You're invited, the art and science of cultivating influence. Welcome to the show, Jon Levy.
Wow, what an intro. I'm going to have to send this to my mother to make her proud. And yeah, the Springboks are incredible. I mean, I was searching like far and wide for a sports team that really represented this idea of team cohesion and dedication. And what I came across was just so inspiring that I dedicated an entire chapter of the book to them.
Great. Well, what does a behavioral scientist living in America, we're going to get into your backstory a little bit later. I totally agree. Why John Smith, Jake White, and the 2007 Springboks won the World Cup. Why did they win it?
So I guess the first question you asked is, what's a behavioral scientist, right? And I guess we could do this in a really kind of funny way for the listeners if they're willing to play along. And here's what we're going to do. I want everybody to take your phones and put it face down. You included, Steve. Go for it. Put it face down.
Got it.
And we're going to play a little game to see how kind of good your memory is. You know how you have an app on the bottom right corner of your screen?
Bottom right.
Without looking.
Okay.
I want you to guess what it is.
I think it's Facebook app.
It's what?
Facebook.
Oh, Facebook. Got it. Okay. Now do me a favor. Check your phone really quick, see if you were right, and then put it back down. And everybody who's listening, please do this along.
Yeah.
Did you put
it's right. Yeah.
You were right. Good. That's great. About 50% of people are right. 50% can't remember. Now, but that's not the real question. Close your eyes.
Okay.
What time did it just display on your phone?
What time?
And the answer is, you probably have no idea. Almost nobody ever gets this right.
No.
And the reason is something called inattentional blindness. Our brain is really good at noticing the things we tell it to look for and basically filtering everything else out. Because if you had to pay attention to everything, you'd go crazy. It's just an overwhelming amount of information. Now, some people see this as a shortcoming. I actually see this as a design characteristic to save energy so that we don't have to be eating constantly. Now, as a behavioral scientist, it means that we realize that we're missing most of what's going on. And my job is to see what's in our blind spots, because there are certain things that we do that we think work really well, and they don't. And then there's certain things that we don't know that if we did them would actually make us a lot more effective. And where I do the research and look for kind of behavioral biases or cues or mechanics or things like that is around human connection, trust, belonging, influence, and decision-making.
Great. So tell us about the Springboks. Why did they win the 2007 World Cup? Because I totally agree with you.
So here's what's interesting. To answer this question, can we kind of first break down something kind of weird about human behavior?
Yeah, go for it. Yeah, the floor is yours.
Awesome. So here's what's really interesting. When you think about the greatest punishments you can give a person in our society besides capital punishment, right? It's either exile or solitary confinement, right, in prison. We're saying that you are so bad that you are not allowed around other human beings. But for human beings, belonging or being around each other is critical because that's how we survived. We're like clearly not the strongest, right? There are so many animals that are way stronger than us. We're not the fastest, but what we are is better at working together to survive than any other species.
Absolutely.
And you can see that based on how much of the planet we've covered, right? And how many challenges we faced, from pandemics to flooding to whatever it is, right? And here's what's really interesting. When you look at the predictors of let's say, living a long time or business success or any of these things, it tends not to be what people think they are. We, you know, living a long time, the greatest predictors are number two, having close friends and family. And number one is something called social integration. It's how many people you come in contact with, or are you part of a community? Now, you can actually track company stock value, employee sick days, and company profitability to the level of trust at a company.
Okay.
That level of belonging. And if you actually look at the greatest predictor of team success, it's something called psychological safety. It's, can I express an idea that goes against the group's view and not be kicked out of the group or punished for it? Because then you can actually have an exchange of ideas that improve the situation. And so you can see that across anything that really matters, our ability to have an impact relies on this ability to belong. And that's where our story of the Springbok begins, because if you look right before Smit was made captain, there was this, I can't even pronounce it properly because I don't speak Afrikaans, but there was this...
Kamstaldraad.
Yes, thank you very, very much. When I had to do the audiobook, I probably went through it like 4 or 5 times. There was this crazy incident where they had like this training camp. First of all, they had a miserable season. They went to this camp where they like had to get naked and like run through the mud and hunt rabbits and kill them, like all this kind of weird stuff. And that, what's that term that you just said?
Kamstaldraad. Yeah.
Yeah, it stands for like barbed wire or something like that. It's just like, it was supposed to be a bonding experience. And these, you know, in theory, these, you put a group of people together in a tough situation, they actually do bond and they get stronger together and feel more camaraderie. But that really didn't end up working well. It mostly just embarrassed the team further, and they realized that they needed new leadership. And when White came in as the coach, what he was, from what I understand, really masterful at was selecting his additional coaches to kind of fill the skill sets that he may or may not have. And one of the things that they really focused on developing was to prevent subcamps from developing within the team. So everybody, regardless of, you know, race or which region they were from, were actually all really one team. And the other thing that he did was he had 2 basic principles. There will not be a fitter team on the pitch, right? Because that's in their control, is their training and their the way they worked. And then the other thing was he focused on giving safety of position. So he picked his core team and he was insanely loyal to them. I mean, just ridiculous. Even when they had huge losing streaks, he would refuse to replace his core team. And you can actually see that because if you look at the number of South African players that have played 100 games or more, there's almost all of them are from that core team.
5 out of 6,
which is incredible. And when we demonstrate that kind of loyalty to people and we make sure that they feel that safe, then it gives them the opportunity to actually perform their best, because then you're not worried about what's going to happen in the next game. You're focused on improving your skill set and you're in it for the long game. And it fosters a sense of loyalty that people are willing to go way further for you than for anything else, for that matter. And so he was able to really create this core team that worked very well together, and then train them and prepare them for the challenges that would take about 4 years till the next World Cup. And,
absolutely. And even when the individual skill wasn't up to scratch or wasn't performing well, he chose the community and the safety and the trust in him as a coach, and the trust as the captain, John Smit, and the trust in the other players, the familiarity and the belonging in that core team. He chose that over ability. And it's it's a fascinating analysis by yourself to look at how important this, belonging and trust is, which we're going to unpack in a little bit later.
It's funny because there's a really wild study that you may have heard of called super chickens. Have you ever come across this?
No.
Oh, it's essentially researchers wanted to test productivity and to figure out like what would actually cause the greatest success. So they took two groups, one group of chickens that were just standard egg producers, because it's really easy to measure egg production. You just count eggs. And then they took another group, and each time there was a clear winner in terms of who's producing the most eggs, they would breed that chicken and then produce the next generation. And what they ended up discovering was that the super chickens, the ones that were bred for, many of them did outproduce everybody else, but it was mostly by attacking them and hurting them.
Wow.
So like they had to push down everybody else. Meanwhile, in the regular group, although there were no chickens that were like super chickens outproducing everybody, because all of them felt safe, they were outproducing the super chickens as well. And incredible. I think that that's kind of a great example of this psychological safety and how the Springbok function, which was nobody in a lot of environments or companies, in order to succeed, in order to stand out, people are pushing everybody else down. Yeah, but when there's safety in position, the way that the Springboks had, then yeah, they had people who kind of maybe stood out in certain ways. I mean, like Smith's a beast of a human being. That guy's like, but it was about the team success. And so they can be supportive of each other, not worried about who's the star of any one play.
Correct. And I'd love to get that study. I'd like you to send it to me sometime. But to the listeners that are listening wherever you are, and to those that are watching on YouTube, I just want you to stop. I want you to breathe through your nose very gently and breathe out, because this is one of the greatest pieces of writing that I've encountered in 2021. And I think this book, You're Invited by Jon Levy, is going to be one of my best books ever. And I have the fortunate privilege of reading at least 50 books a year. But I want you to listen to this wherever you are, because I think these words have touched me, and I've dissected this book in and out and spent a lot of time listening to Jon. But regardless of what you want to accomplish, from growing your business or creating a great company culture to championing a social cause or changing your habits, you can't do it alone. The people around you define your success, and they have the potential to change the course of your life. That's what You're Invited is about. The most universal strategy for success is creating meaningful connections with those who can impact you, your life, and the things you care about. But how do you make those connections and build trust quickly? What if you're introverted or hate networking? Behavioral scientist Jon Levy had no money, reputation, or status, but was able to convince Nobel laureates, Olympians, celebrities, Fortune 500 executives, and even an occasional princess, not only to give him advice, but to cook him dinner, wash his dishes, sweep his floors, and then thank him for the experience. The goal of his gatherings, much like this book, was not networking. It was to build meaningful and lasting relationships. The private community formed from those dinner experiences became known as the Influencers, named for the members' success and industry influence. Since its inception more than a decade ago, the Influencers has grown into the largest private group of its kind worldwide, a thriving community that connects both in person and through digital experiences. In You're Invited, Levy guides us through the art and science of creating deep and meaningful connections with anyone, regardless of stature or celebrity, and demonstrates how to develop influence, gain trust, and build community so that we can impact society and achieve what's important to us. Probably one of the most profound things I've read in a very long time, because we've got this meme out there, Jon, that says social distancing. And I've done my best to break that terminology, because I really believe words form who we are. And we're trying to call it physical distancing. It makes us thrive. And we need more social closeness. We need more social togetherness ever before in this pandemic time. And to have a book like this talking about meaningful relationships and trust is remarkable. And I want you to just start your backstory at that seminar where you probably heard a very important statement that possibly changed the course of your life.
Yeah, well, It's interesting. I was probably about 28, and I was heavily in debt from university. I was overweight. I was like kind of the stereotypical person not living up to their potential. And whatever that means, I'm not like really sure. And I I'm sitting in this seminar because it seems much like you, learning obsessed, right? I figure if I could gain one thing that could have an impact, then the time dedication's worth it. And I'm sitting there, and the leader said something that was really striking. He said the fundamental element that defines the quality of our lives are the people we surround ourselves with and the conversations that we have with them. And I said, okay, if that's true, then maybe the strategy I've been using to improve my life has been a little off, right? I would try to set an alarm for 6 a.m. and then, to go work out, and then I'd hit the snooze a million times. Or I would not understand why, like, I couldn't get into the habit of saving more, and, that my habits weren't where I wanted them to be. And then I ended up thinking, okay, if it's about who we're connected to and how much they trust us, then maybe I just need to surround myself with the people that really inspire me. If I want to be fit, maybe I need to hang out with more athletes. If I want to get my finances in order, maybe it's about hanging out with the people I know that are financially successful, so that their habits become my routines.
Absolutely.
And being a science geek, I looked into the research, and I came across this crazy study. It looked at answering the question, is the obesity epidemic the kind of epidemic that spreads from person to person, like an infection? Or is it a percentage of the population, like Alzheimer's? To the best of our knowledge, you shake hands with somebody who has Alzheimer's, you're not going to get Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
And what they found was absolutely startling, that if you have a friend who's obese, your chances increase 45%.
Wow.
Your friends who do not know them have a 20% increased chance, and their friends have a 5% increased chance, which means that we each have an effect 3 degrees out. People, like, literally, we have no clue exist. And this kind of effect is true for happiness, marriage and divorce rates, smoking habits, voting habits, literally anything you can think of. And so I said, okay, if things spread from person to person so much, then it's not just about connecting and knowing somebody. Just knowing you is great. I have that impact, but you're amazing. And if I have another person that I've met that's really exceptional, by introducing you to each other, then I develop a community of extraordinary people positively impacting one another. And that increases how close you are to my life, right? If you're close with 5 of my best friends, that's going to draw you in closer and have an even greater impact on my life, and vice versa. And so my objective became not just to meet extraordinary people, but to build a community where they feel a sense of belonging, so that they stick around and positively impact one another.
Great. And what a great backstory. And you've got a little bit more sort of a backstory to share about why you wrote this book and how your childhood was, and the feelings of anxiety and isolation that you went through. And you really went from pain to purpose, and possibly that was one of the internal drivers when you went to that seminar that sort of propagated you to just a world-class behavioral scientist. So tell us a little bit more about that, Jon.
Well, growing up, I was super, super, super geeky, right? Like, now we can kind of joke around about it because everybody likes geeky things. Right? The Marvel movies are like the biggest movies ever. They're based on comic books. Back then I was into computers in the 80s. Now everybody walks around with a computer on their wrist and in their pocket, right? But like, nobody liked computers back then, right? It wasn't a cool thing to like. And so I didn't fit in. And I didn't have many friends. I was kind of lonely. And I just thought that made me weird, because when I'd watch television, I'd see all these groups of like kids hanging out together and thinking, oh, that's what everybody's life must be like. But when I grew up, I started looking at the research, and it told a really different story. In the US, in 1985, the average American had 3 friends besides family, close friends. By 2004, we were down to 2. We had lost a third of our social ties in less than a generation. And I know the tendency is to want to blame social media and things like that. This is before most social media, right? It's more likely that it's because people were moving and more for work or college or things like that. And then when you move, you reset your social ties, right? You don't talk to your best friend from grade school when you moved 1,000 kilometers away or whatever.
Sure. So 17 years later, it could be down to 1 friend. Am I right, John? Is a good possibility.
Here's what's interesting is that especially now during the pandemic, it's even worse because, like you said, people are socially distancing rather than physically distancing, right? When we're not around the office, then we forget all the people at the office. When we're not at our university, we forget about our classmates. And the concern in general is that people who are really social end up meeting more people, right? Like if you have lots of friends, you make more friends. People who self-isolate, when you're lonely and don't feel like you have a lot of friends and you're, let's say, down to 3 friends and one of them moves, suddenly you're down to 2 friends and that person doesn't get replaced. People who are lonely often begin to feel like they're deserving of that loneliness. And for me, having grown up so lonely, I know how painful that is. In fact, when you look at brain scans in an fMRI and you look at social distress like loneliness, isolation, when people make fun of you, things like that, it activates almost the identical areas of the brain as physical pain, which is kind of wild to think about because we're used to thinking about physical pain as something that's worthy of being punished and being sent to jail, right? It's like somebody hits you, there's legal consequences. When we think of if somebody causes isolation or emotional pain, we don't relate to it that way, even though the damage internally in our brains is almost identical.
Yeah, that's incredibly powerful. Why don't you just expand on that cyber war game and what happened to the functional, magnetic resonance images and how important it is that they took Tylenol in the study, but paracetamol you could take. And I mean, that's crucially important because what people do is they get addicted to opioids because they got social pain. And people aren't addressing the social pain. So therefore they take painkillers and it works on the brain in the same way as to treat the physical pain. So just expand a bit on that because I thought that was pretty profound.
So there's kind of these 2 wild studies that took place. One is by Dr. Matt Lieberman and his colleagues. I think it's at UCLA. And they invited people in to play a video game, but it was the most silly video game ever. It's called Cyberball. And the way it works is, let's say I'm the player. I'm put in an fMRI, my brain's being scanned, and I'm playing with 2 other people. And in this game, it's really simple. There's characters and a ball, and I pass the ball to player 1, let's say. Player 1 passes it to player 2, and player 2 passes it back to me. Everybody's passing the ball around. And then at a certain point, player 1 and player 2 just stop passing me the ball at all and pass it just between the 2 of them. And this continues for a while to the point that it's obvious that I'm being ignored. And then the experiment ends. And what you see is that social pain activates almost identical to that physical pain.
Wow, that's incredible.
So Lieberman and his colleagues decided to do a second experiment. And what they did was they had groups of people take a pill for 2 weeks before they came in. Half of the group got a painkiller. The other half got a placebo. Had no effect on them, probably some kind of sugar pill or something. And when they arrived, they played the game, and those people who took the painkiller had no evidence of social pain. It was gone. While those who had the placebo had the same response as that initial group, that social pain activated. And what we begin to realize is that really pain is pain. And painkillers can affect both social and physical pain. And this points really importantly to what you were talking about, which is that a fundamental portion of addiction, right? Certain drugs are obviously more chemically addictive than others, and addiction's very complex. But a very decent portion of it is this idea of social pain, or what researchers sometimes call dislocation. It's where you're separated either from your purpose, your loved ones, you feel isolated and lonely, or maybe there's some kind of tragedy. And when that exists, drugs or alcohol or whatever it is don't just make you feel good, they prevent you from feeling bad. They do the same thing that the medication did in the cyberball experiment.
Sure.
And in fact, this was a theory behind something called the rat park, which is this completely insane experiment that I came across. You see, in addiction, most of the research was originally done on, you take a rat, you put it in a cage by itself, and you offer it water and morphine water. And the rat will drink morphine water until it dies. Now, the problem with this model, according to this researcher, Dr. Alexander, is that rats are social creatures. They interact a lot with other rats. And if you were to take a human being, put them in solitary confinement, and offer them morphine water and water, the social isolation would be so painful that they would actually probably drink the morphine water until they got sick too. Yeah. So he ran an experiment where he took rats, put them in what he called a rat park, which is like this ideal playground where rats can run around with other rats and play games, and they have wheels and toys and all these things. And they had morphine water and water. And according to Dr. Alexander, a portion of some of the rats liked to party sometimes and have some morphine water, but overwhelmingly they just drank the water.
Wow.
And
that's incredible.
And so his theory essentially became that in order for addiction to really take hold for most people, you need a sense of dislocation, a crisis of, right, an emotional state.
Yeah.
Because the fact is that you have access in normal situations to drinking 24/7 if you wanted to, but the entire population isn't drunk constantly.
Yeah.
Like it's really unappealing to be drunk all the time.
Sure.
So there's probably something else affecting it, and that's where Alexander's dislocation theory comes in.
Good. And you talk about what's happened to just people's friendships and that. And I want to get your perspective on why people aren't valuing social ties. They are moving away. We've had many people immigrate and move from South Africa just because of being post-apartheid and the crime. And there's a lot of reasons. And my family, we're here to stick it out and become part of the solution. Not that people that have left weren't part of the solution, but people have moved off and they haven't valued social ties, or they've moved another city, they've gone to Cape Town, breaking those social ties. It seems that people have lost sort of the value and the importance of that to their health, to their wellness, everything that you've said. And I think that's why I'm being so struck by your book, because it's to really sort of unpack and distill how important social ties and social integration is. Where have we lost this value, Jon?
So it's an interesting and I'd say probably complex situation. There's a lot of factors. So one is this belief that life will be better if, right? So I'll use an example from North America. If it's quite common to think that, okay, if I grew up in Mexico and I can get my family to the US, they'll be happier and better off growing up in a land of opportunity. Here's what's really interesting. Being disconnected from our family and losing support of our loved ones who are around, and being in a new environment where we have a lot of social pressures, but also in the US, there's, depending on where, there's also high levels of racism, which increases anxiety and stress dramatically. So end up having people in a like fight or flight or freeze response for years on end. And it turns out that if you look at the research, it's pretty suggestive that those kids would have been happier growing up back home, being surrounded by multiple generations of loved ones. And although there might not be the theoretical potential of becoming like the CEO of Microsoft, right, being what they call a dreamer, but on average, their life would have been better.
Sure, that's
and
powerful.
So I think that there's this grass is always greener kind of theory. I think that there's this belief that more money and more status equals better life. And that's been sold to us for a long time. And that doesn't really pan out.
Sure, that's powerful. That's powerful because in South Africa, we've got this term Ubuntu. I don't know if you've heard it. You know, Nelson Mandela said Ubuntu. It's really summarized is I am because we are. And it's this, that what I achieve is really based on the community around me and the achievements that they've had and the work that they've put in. And so Africa does hold this very close sense of community and living for one another. I thought it was a socio-economic thing that when you don't have much, what have you got? You've got each other. You have to work for one another. You have to build one another up because often that's all you've really got. And so it's pretty powerful. And I want you to take us through the influence equation. I want you to take us through these influencer dinners, all your years of practical experience, all your empirical evidence that you've gone through that just allowed you to write the most incredible book. I mean, I say this, that every single person needs to read this book, needs to dissect this book. I would love to teach this book. Why? Because we've lost the second most important predictor of longevity. We've lost the first most important predictor of longevity. And people are waking up, John, saying TGIF. I want to puke. I want to catch a TGIF, which is thank God it's Friday. We need to have a narrative, and this is our acronym at Made to Thrive, TGIM. Thank God it's Monday. Why? Because people can wake up with a purpose to serve other people. And you talk about meaning, long-lasting relationships. When I read that, I get so emotional. I get so emotional because people have forgotten the essence of contentment, of fulfillment, of satisfaction. And they're following this really beautiful house, and nothing against America. I've been at least 20 times. I love it, but it's the green grass and it's the white picket fence and it's the little boy riding his bike down the road. And they think that is fulfillment and that is happiness. And they've got this hedonic understanding of this quick happiness when it's really about this eudaimonia that we really need to embrace. And so I thank you for your work, and I thank you for these influencer dinners. And I really want to unpack that because it was,
Can I
go for it.
This, what you just said. Here's what I think is so amusing about this quote unquote American dream, right? So first of all, the green grass that everybody sees in their front yard, completely invasive, not good for the environment. And it's, I think, really representative of American culture because now you're putting something that doesn't belong in the environment and people have to spend hours every week mowing it and wasting their time for something that's wasting water and resources. The second is that if you look at places that have really longevity, right? Like lots of centenarians, people who live 100 years or more, their environments are often packed really tight. It's not about like having massive homes because that can feel very empty and isolating, but rather like these intimate homes where multiple generations will cook together and support each other and people stop by. Right? I look at my wife's family in Siberia. There's nothing lavish about the homes. They're all really small, but everybody constantly stops by and it's like joyous. You feel the love in the family and it's incredible.
Yeah, it's powerful. Yeah, go for it. It's like my family in Cyprus. They live in the village or they've lived in with a community. They didn't have those things. But the concern I have is they don't realize how good they've got it. They don't realize how much contentment and fulfillment they have because they've been sold almost a Hollywood dream of, the materialism and the power
America,
and the status. But it's the relationships there, and it's almost they don't realize they go to the square or the platea, as we say in Greece, and then they basically go there and meet up and connect, and they know each other, and there's less hierarchical status, and the pediatrician speaks to the gardener who speaks to the painter. So it is there, but they almost want to move out of that environment. They want to move out from it, the new generation, which is a fascinating feature.
There's a famous research study, I think it's called the Farmingdale or Farmingham study,
Yes.
which, oh, do you know the?
Yeah, I think it's called the Framingham study. Is it the Harvard
Framingham,
study?
that's what it
Yeah,
is.
yeah.
Yeah, it's there was a community of Italian immigrants that defied all the odds from a health perspective.
Yeah.
They were eating high cholesterol diets that were like
the
really...
Rosettans. Malcolm Gladwell spoke about it in Outlier.
Oh, did they?
Yeah.
And essentially that nobody understood how they could have all the health markers that should suggest that they're dead.
Yeah.
But we're living a great life. And the answer is actually something called the rabbit effect. The rabbit effect, have you come across this idea?
No.
The rabbit effect is researchers were looking at impact of infection on immune system for rabbits. And they had several different groups being tested, and they would inject them with an infection and look at survival rates and so on. Yeah. But there was one group that was just outlasting everybody else, and nobody understood why. And when they investigated, they found that there was a researcher who was really attached to the rabbits and would come in and pet them and show them love and affection. And rather than being isolated in a cage, what happened is that this signals the release of endorphins, and it signals the release of and it reduces stress response of cortisol and things like that, which is an immunity suppressor. And suddenly these rabbits that were literally infected and shouldn't have been surviving were surviving because somebody loved them.
Sure. Powerful, really powerful. So take us through the influence equation that I think is incredible. Trust.
Sure.
Talk about the sense of community, connection, and the influencer dinners, because I don't know if you franchise this concept out, you got an incredible part of the book, applying it all in your life. It's not only theoretical, your book, there's a whole, part 3 that's practical, but give us a quick sort of backstory on it and tell us how it just came into being.
So I was sitting in that seminar and I realized that I need to figure out a way to really engage influential people. Fundamentally, what I wanted for my life was to have an ability to have an influence on it, right? To have an impact on either people or outcomes, whether that's producing a project that was my dream or influencing the people who are important to me, getting my boss to like my idea. You see, most of us have heard the word influencer so much that we relate to influence as somebody with a large social media following.
Yeah.
and that's fine. Like, it's great if you can produce content that people really love, like such as yourself. That's incredibly impressive. But we need to separate content production and audience and being able to connect with a community like that with me being able to influence my life. Because most of the things we actually care to impact really doesn't require a large audience, right? If you want to get your kid to eat healthy, you don't need 1 million followers. Like, it would be weird if that's the relationship.
Yeah.
So in order to impact our life, the things that matter are who we're connected to, because it's near impossible to influence somebody we're not connected to, how much they trust us, because if you don't trust me, you're not going to be opting in to be influenced by me. And then the third characteristic is the sense of community that we share. And the reason I emphasize this is that if that obesity study showed us anything, it's that everything spreads from person to person. And the more tightly knit the community is, the faster things spread. So if I'm part of a community, I have a higher chance of having an idea spread or my impact grow than if I'm by myself. And so if we can really become masterful at connecting with anybody, building trust quickly, and giving them a sense of belonging, really the only limitation on your influence is then what you want to use it for.
Wow.
And that was kind of the starting point, was, okay, if I need to begin by connecting with people, what would actually have people want to engage with me? What would have the CEO of a major company or the editor-in-chief of a magazine want to connect with me? And I think the biggest mistake we make is people like, okay, we need to get their attention. And I want to emphasize this. This is really important. Attention is almost meaningless, right? People commit crimes every day. It gets them lots of attention. That doesn't mean you should go commit a crime.
Mm.
What we want is people's interest. We want them to hear about us and go, oh, wow, I should go meet that person.
Mm.
How do I engage with them, right? Otherwise, it's me going out all the time, which is fine, but it's just a much harder task. And so I became really dedicated to understanding what will garner people's interest. And we realized that it really depends on their level of influence, right? What has Oprah or Richard Branson engage is going to be very different than the CMO of a major tech company or a community leader like a coach or even a religious leader. And so we looked at the science and saw what are their social pressures and how do we break them down. And then with that, we were able to kind of create different activities and experiences.
Fantastic. And my wife's an occupational therapist, and she always speaks about activities. You know, when we have friends over, we're always playing a game, and we have, I mean, people just love what we do. And we play the sticker game where you put a stick on your forehead and you have to guess what the other person is. And she's taught me so much about group work and activities and that. And it's just built something so incredible in our family and our friends and people who come over. They just love their time. But possibly give us some sort of or deconstruct trust. How do you build trust? It's such a big word now. And what about connection and sense of community? Take us through those three major areas of the influence equation and how you did that at the dinners.
Right. So I think the first thing maybe I should do is describe the dinner. Yeah. And then we can work backwards to understand all the mechanics. So the influencers dinner, we invite 12 people at a time. They're not allowed to talk about their work or even give their last name. They'll cook dinner together. And when they sit down to eat, they get to guess what everybody else does. And that's when they find out that it's, you know, celebrities, Nobel laureates, Olympians, editors, authors, award winners, musicians, you name it. I've hosted over 2,000 people. Up until now, I've had 227 dinners in 10 cities in 3 countries. And then we also have a salon series where we invite people back to really build a sense of community between them. Happens every month in 3 cities. Well, at least before COVID did. Now we do it digitally and all that. So let's talk about connection. What would get your interest? Well, there's a few base level elements. There's novelty, right? So there's a novelty just means something is new. But it turns out there's a section of the brain called the SNVTA. And what's wild about this area is it's the major novelty center, and it'll respond relative to how novel something is. The more novel, the more it responds, and it actually entices us to explore and understand things. So you come across something novel and you're like, wait, what is that? And it actually gains your interest and you want to go out and engage with it. So we knew that we would have to design something novel, something that stands out as different. Now, if you notice, our entire format's different. The guests cook, there's a secret element, there's a game we play. So we knew we had that handled. Now, there's also a really important thing with regard to influence, which is the more influential you are, the more people want something from you. And so we realized that if everybody's asking you for something, we need to begin with generosity. Okay. So we didn't charge anything. Okay. So the event is completely free. But I do want to point out, it doesn't mean it needs to be expensive. Yeah. Right? There's this image that if I want to hang out with fancy people, then I have to spend a lot. That, in my mind, is a waste of time and money. And the reason is that if you look at the things that actually bond us, we're more bonded getting stuck in the rain on a hike together, which costs nothing, versus going to a luxury spa where we're getting massages because we're isolated from each other.
Yeah, yeah, I agree.
And so the dinner, the big joke is at a famous journalist come and she said, I was expecting a phenomenal meal and decent company. I got the exact opposite, which is the people there are what really we care about in the activity and the experience.
Yeah.
The food itself is like 12 people who don't know how to cook, cooking junky Mexican food. It's not like a great meal.
Yeah.
So that's the novelty and the generosity aspect, right?
That's connection. Are we talking now? You finished connection.
We're talking about things that will actually draw you in to want to connect.
Correct.
Now, the third thing I would say, which is really important, is curation. The more important you are, the less time you have. And frankly, everybody thinks that fancy people spend their time with other fancy people. That's not true. They're mostly with their administrators or their staff, right? If you look at who you spend most of your time with, it's the people that work for you. Yeah. And then some clients here and there and so on. So if I can curate an environment with other interesting people, you'll actually go really far out of your way. And the classic examples are, have you ever heard of Davos, that the World Economic
Yeah. Where Bill Gates and they all go there, pay a fortune.
Yeah. And it costs like $250,000 to attend or something like that. But people go not because it's particularly pleasant. It's like freezing Davos slushy snow weather. They go because of who's there. Yeah. Because everybody wants a seat at the table. The other examples like TED. Yeah. TED costs somewhere around $10,000 and you have to be accepted and invited in order to attend, which means, and at the upper levels of TED, people are spending hundreds of thousands. So this kind of status of getting a seat at the table or being in a curated environment is really wildly worth it. Now, those are kind of the basics. There are a few others that we could explore, but let's kind of stick to this, right? So we can see the right people, something that stands out as different, and something that's generous. Yeah. And so that's really what we focused on in the early stages is, great, let's get the most interesting people we can in the room. And so we also focused on diversity, because to you, getting to meet a neuroscientist studying how the brain works, and then a musician who composes incredible music, and an athlete who's competing at the top levels suddenly becomes more interesting, at least in my mind, than if it's all athletes. Correct.
Great. And then tell us about the activities and the IKEA effect. I learned about the IKEA effect from you. It's just profound because my wife's been doing it for so long, and it's just happened, subconsciously to build things. And I think it's profound that everybody should know.
So when it comes to, so that's the connection aspect. That's what things that'll get people to want to engage. But we realized that I'm going to probably have about 3 hours with people, and that's a long time, but it's a very short time to build really trusted relationships. So we needed to understand how trust works. And there's kind of two weird aspects to trust. The first is what trust is made out of. What would even have these people trust me and accept my invitation? And it turns out that most researchers agree trust is made of three things: competence, your ability to do something; honesty, that you're truthful; and the third is benevolence, that you have other people's best interests in mind. Now, they're not equal in terms of the way we value them. If your friend, you and your friend are playing basketball and they miss a shot, you don't say, oh, they're incompetent, I can't be their friend anymore, they breached trust, right? No, you say, like, everybody misses a shot. It's like part of the game, right? So if you can screw up incompetence occasionally, and it's not a big deal, as long as you have a decent track record. Now, if somebody screws up with honesty, right? You found out somebody lied to you, that's going to have a much bigger impact. You're going to begin to doubt everything they've said and everything they say moving forward. So we can see that honesty is valued above competence. But then there's this weird loophole. All right, so the two of us are walking down the street, and you say, John, can we stop by my friend's house really quick? I have to pick something up. And I'm like, sure, it's no problem. You walk to your friend's house, we open the door, and 40 of my closest friends jump out and scream, surprise. And you
Yeah.
have just planned me a surprise party and executed it. And it would be really, really weird if I turned to you and said, you just lied to me. We can't be friends
Yeah,
anymore.
exactly.
Why is that? Why would that be so weird?
Because you got my best interest at heart. You're benevolent.
Yeah. Yeah. You went out of your way for me to make me happy, to show that you appreciate me. And so you can see we value benevolence above honesty and honesty above competence. The weird thing about human beings is that we do just about everything backwards.
Mm.
We try to demonstrate competence and say, my company can do A, B, and C, and we have a great track record, right? When really what we need to do is be leading with benevolence. At my company, my main focus is making sure that you succeed. I know that to you, being able to do the things that you need to are at the heart of what you love and care about. It's how you pay your employees and how you care for your customers. And we're not going to let anything happen to that. Now,
Brilliant.
you can see that leading with benevolence feels very different than leading with competence.
Correct.
Now, so
Great.
we didn't even bother trying to tell
Yeah.
people we make better burritos, because we don't. What we did was we said, we're doing this event for you guys, right? I have no business value here. I'm not going to do business with an Olympian, a Nobel laureate, or a Grammy winning musician. It's not my industries.
Yeah.
Almost all of you have nothing to do with the way that I actually make money. So, and I'm, not here to steal your awards either. So it's for other people's best interest, because I actually really just enjoy meeting people.
Yeah.
So we got that part. And after years and years of doing it, right, then I demonstrated competence and honesty. Now, that answers the question of why somebody might trust me, but it doesn't answer the question of how do we build trust quickly between the participants. Now, in American culture, and I don't know how it is in South Africa, if we want to win business over, what we'll often do is take people out for expensive business dinners, which are super awkward, or we invite you to a party and give you a swag bag.
Yeah.
Like, oh, if I give you this stupid bag with a whole bunch of trash in it, you're going to trust me and like me more.
Yeah.
And what do you mostly do with your swag bags?
You check them.
Yeah. Or you have give them to your kids, or like it's completely devalued. So you can see it doesn't really work. Now, gifting can work, but it would have to be really like an intimate, personalized gift to some degree. Like if I got you the ball from the Springboks, winning game, you'd be like, wow, Jon really knows what I care about.
Yeah.
But that's really hard to do at scale. Like I can't do that for every guest.
Sure.
So what works is actually the exact opposite. It's called the IKEA effect. And it states that we disproportionately care about our IKEA furniture because it's difficult and annoying to assemble. So anything we put effort into, we care about more. And so we realized that we have to find an activity that was novel, right? That was generous, that people would want to come together around, where they could invest effort into one another and the activity. And that's when we came up with cooking. We realized that, okay, as people are cooking, they're going to be investing all this effort into one another and care more about one another. But it still didn't answer the question of why does it work? And the reason it works is because of the way that human beings actually build trust. We think that trust precedes vulnerability. If I trust you, I'll tell you my secrets. It's actually the other way around. It works in a very predictable process called a vulnerability loop. You see, if I signal vulnerability, I say, oh my God, Steve, I'm totally worn out after writing this book. It was the hardest project of my entire life. If I say that and then you ignore me or make fun of me, trust will be reduced.
Yeah.
But if you acknowledge it and then signal vulnerability back, Jon, I know how you feel. Keeping all of my programs afloat during COVID was so hard. It was just exhausting. I'm with you. Now we've demonstrated that we can be vulnerable to the same level and we're safe, and trust is increased.
Yeah.
So the reason that this IKEA effect works is that inevitably, as we are cooking together, I'm going to say, Steve, can you pass me and before I finish the sentence, you already have passed me a cutting board and a spoon or something like that. And the loop is open and closed. And so when we're working on stuff together, especially in a team experience that's time locked, right? So there's an urgency, then suddenly we're opening and closing these loops very quickly, and people feel so bonded after an hour of cooking that it's like they've been friends for years. Fantastic. And then when we finally sit down to eat, then we play this playful game, and they're like, oh my God, that's what you do. That's so cool. I've always been a fan of that, or whatever it is.
Well, I salute you. I want to honor your time. I'd love to pack out sense of community at a later stage. I know that you've got to head off. This is an incredible book. Maybe just at the end now, just tell us about Jon Levy, where he's headed, and can we bring the influencer dinner to South Africa and Africa, because I think it's so profound. And what other books are you going to be writing in the future, where people can connect with you on social media? I just want to, you don't know me, we've connected for an hour. I'm a South African, I'm a Cypriot South African, but you've spoken some true words, and I'm going to do everything I can to get it out and hopefully bring the influencer dinner to South Africa and Africa and beyond. So let us know about Jon Levy in the future.
Wow. Okay, so I'll get the basics out, right? Anybody can get a hold of me pretty easily. My website is Jon Levy TLB, JONLEVY, T like Thomas, L like lion, B like boy.com. You can contact me there. I'm the same at all the social media sites, so Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Clubhouse, all that. So feel free to reach out. As far as what's next, I wasn't kidding when I said I'm feeling really burnt out. So I'm trying to take a month off, and then I'm going to write a book, I think, about burnout. And so I think that there's a lot that I didn't do to take care of myself as I was writing and releasing this book. I worked so hard that it was unhealthy. Now, I achieved my goals, which is I wanted to hit the New York Times bestseller list. I hit the Wall Street Journal, USA Today. Like, I have all the awards and accolades, which I was hoping for, but it was brutal. And so I want to figure out how to do this in a healthy way moving forward. And then what's next? I'll be honest, besides writing eventually another book and doing more dinners now that we're beginning to open up here in the US, I'd love to do a dinner in South Africa. I'd love to do them everywhere. So I think if there's an excuse, I'm in. I'll gladly come out there.
There's a huge fan out here who'd love to pioneer it, and who's pretty well connected in different circles and different creeds and different cultures. So when you're ready and you've had your break and you're ready to engage, I'll be putting my hand up for the first time, because I truly believe in community. You know, Mark Hyman said, greatest force to bring about change is your community. And I don't think there's one community, John. I think there's multiple communities, from your social ties to your mentor, to your coach. You know, who is your coach? Everybody needs a mentor. Everybody needs a coach, to, you know, different types of communities. So thank you so much. I salute you. I declare blessing. I declare favor over you. I declare that your purposes and your plans will reach the sky to whatever you want to achieve, John, because you are a true pioneer in the health space. You're a true pioneer in the performance space, and safety and belonging and community are things that need to be heard of more and more again. So take care, and hopefully we'll connect again. Hopefully we'll have a dinner again. Hopefully we can connect online, because you're a true health hero.
Thank you so much for having me on, and it's been an absolute pleasure.